Hello, and welcome to the next unit. This unit, we will be talking about the rock cycle. What is a rock? That we'll start there. A rock is a naturally occurring solid made of one or more minerals. So that's important to know that minerals are what make up rocks. So we're going to be looking at minerals for the rest of this section here. So the rock cycle is the process by which new rock forms from old rock. It's pretty similar to the star cycle, actually. You get something being born, usually due to like a conglomeration or compaction of a bunch of material. And then eventually it weathers away and becomes a whole new thing. The three main rock types are sedimentary, metamorphic, and igneous. Here's just a picture of a bunch of rocks here. Um, we've got we've got some sedimentary, some igneous, and then this is metamorphic here. Okay, so processes that shape the Earth and determine what happens during the rock cycle are weathering, erosion, and deposition. This is like the starter. This is how you get a lot of sedimentary rocks. So sedimentary rocks, it's kind of in the name. It's rocks made from a lot of sediment. How you get a lot of sediment is you get bigger rocks that have been weathered, eroded, and then they got deposited somewhere else. So deposition is just the removal of something from its source. So when you weather something, you're taking away a lot of its pieces, and then it's going to erode, it's going to move, and be deposited somewhere else. So what happens after that is compaction and cementation. So compaction is just with that pressure. There's going to be a lot of pressure underneath of the surface. So as you go from the crust down to the core, the pressure increases. So what happens is you're going to get some weathering, erosion, and then those weathered, eroded pieces are going to be deposited. If they're deposited under heavy pressure, then they're going to compact. They're going to do this sort of thing and get closer and have more pressure. And then after that is cementation. So what's happening with that is those compacted minerals are eventually going to bond together, kind of like glue, like cement. So that's just how you're going to remember that. And then heat and pressure, that's going to cause a lot of stress on the rock. So the pressure is for compaction and cementation. We also know that pressure and heat are pretty similar. So with more pressure and more heat, it's going to kind of destroy those bonds for those minerals. They're going to become molten rock. So under the surface is going to be magma, and outside of the surface is lava. We know that from the volcano unit we just did. And then melting. So after that heat and pressure kind of destroy the bonds between the minerals, they're going to melt, become magma or lava, and then they'll cool and then become another type of rock. Okay, so here's just a good graphic here of the processes happening here. So we're getting rain, wind, and freezing. That's going to be that weathering process. The rock is going to get broken up. It's going to be eroded. It's going to move, most likely down this stream here in the form of sediment. It's going to be deposited once that stream kind of either hits an obstacle or slows down. Right here, you're going to get a lot of deposition. Here, you're going to get deposition. And so that mineral moves. So that's the three processes for weathering, erosion, and deposition. And then after that, you get compaction and cementation. So here's compaction. It's a pressure is pushing all of these particles together. They end up like this in a nice little structure. And then we get further into it where they are pressured even more, usually exposed to some heat. And then they get together and form bonds and cement together like this so that all those pores have been filled in with other pieces of that rock there. Okay, so here's how metamorphic rock kind of gets made. We get some erosion up here, some weathering and erosion. It gets deposited down in here. That's that deposition. The pressure is going to push it down. This is all compacted and cemented. And then eventually it's going to hit this heat and pressure here where it's going to melt. And so it looks like these rocks right here are melting. And once they melt, normally they turn into a different rock type. So We've got this sedimentary rock that it's an igneous up here, turns into sedimentary after weathering and erosion, gets deposited, it moves down, and due to heat and pressure, it turns into magma, gets forced up because of those convection currents, heat rises, so it gets forced up and turns into a completely different rock than it originally was, and so that's metamorphic. So with metamorphic, I want you to think of metamorphosis, think of like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. It's changing. So that's exactly what that is. So here is the rock cycle. This is something you're going to want to look at more in depth. I'm going to go over it, but this is going to be one of the things you're going to want to have open for the quiz. So we'll start with igneous rock. For igneous rock, a good example is Pikes Peak. Granite is an igneous rock. So we've got Pikes Peak. At the top, it gets weathered and eroded, turns into sediment. That sediment is deposited down at the base. It gets compacted and cemented, eventually turning into sedimentary rock. That sedimentary rock is going to be exposed to some heat and pressure. It's going to turn into metamorphic rock, which will then melt, turn into either magma or lava. It will cool and become igneous rock again. Then that igneous rock can be melted, turn into magma and lava, cool again, and turn back into igneous rock, or it can be exposed to heat and pressure and turn into metamorphic rock again. So they all can kind of become one another just due to certain environmental constraints. All right, so how do we classify rocks? We classify them by their composition, which is what the rock is made of. This is going to be on the quiz, so remember this stuff. And by the texture, which is the shape and the size of the grains that make up the rock. So coarse-grained and fine-grained. When you think of coarse-grained and fine-grained, think of like sandpaper. So when you have fine grains with sandpaper, they're really, really small. Okay, and so here's just a nice little classification of certain rocks. Here's all the sedimentary rocks. Conglomerates, probably one of the biggest ones. We have biological sedimentary rocks, which is just like dead organisms that got compacted and turned into fuel. So that's what coal and chert and shale are. And then we've got limestone, that's limestone and sandstone. Those are probably the two biggest sedimentary rocks we've got. These metamorphic rocks here, they're classified by foliation. We'll get into that a little bit later, but it's not super necessary that you know that. And then igneous rocks are classified by intrusive and extrusive. So extrusive means that it cooled outside of the Earth's surface and it cooled very quickly. Intrusive means that it cooled inside the Earth's surface, and usually that's very slow. So here's some examples of igneous rocks right here. We've got granite on the left and basalt on the right. Basalt is going to be like ocean crust, and granite is going to be continental crust a lot of the time. So that's something important to remember. So granite is going to be igneous that contains quartz. Quartz is the mineral, so that's going to be the composition. And then the texture is going to be the crystals there. So when they cool very slowly, that's going to be intrusive, so that's magma, because magma is inside of the earth. They have large pores or large crystals, so you can see these crystals right here. So that's going to be texture. So composition is quartz, texture is large crystals. And then with basalt on the other side there, they're rich in iron and magnesium. They're more dense than granite. That's why oceanic plates go under continental plates, because they're higher in granite. And they form through lava, which is outside of the Earth's surface, so they're extrusive, and they generally have very small crystals or pores. So you can see the crystals here, you can't here. So that's fine-grained and that's coarse-grained. Okay, let's try and get to the next slide here. Doesn't look like we have any. Okay, so that's pretty much all you're going to need to know. If you want to know any more, go ahead and hit me up with a question, comment, or concern. I will also post an additional link showing you the 3 types of rocks with examples and their texture and composition.